By the time the records were unsealed, the ink had already faded, but the names still bled through the parchment, for entries written by the same trembling hand. Each one recorded a union that could not exist, each sealed by a priest who later vanished. And every line, every vow, bore the same bride's name. Lady Elsbeth Harrow. Before we continue, take a breath. The past is closer than you think. Subscribe to remember what others forgot. The winter of 1842 found the parish of Edivane cloaked in fog so dense it made even the church spire look like a memory. The sea beyond the cliffs howled through the nights, and the gulls never came inland anymore. Among the parishioners, few dared to speak of Harrow Manor. The house stood 3 miles east, half swallowed by vines and silence, its windows blackened like blind eyes turned toward the earth. In the town's narrow archive, a single candle flickered beside the historian's gloved hands. His name was Thomas Lewin, a quiet man of unshakable curiosity who had come from Charleston to document forgotten marriages of the antebellum South. He expected dull genealogies, names, dates, alliances. But what he uncovered that night beneath the dust of 70 years would claw at reason itself. He had been working for hours, the chill of stone walls creeping into his bones, when he noticed an entry misfiled among ordinary unions. The parchment had a faint odor of smoke. The record bore the mark of Reverend Callum's seal, though history claimed the man drowned in 1843. Thomas leaned closer, eyes narrowing. 4 dates, each a year apart. 4 grooms, Edward Harrow, Julian Harrow, Simon Harrow, and an entry with no groom at all, merely House of Harrow. And across from each name, one bride. Elspeth. The repetition unsettled him. In all his years among archives he had seen widows remarry, cousins interwoven through heritage, but this was no clerical error. It felt deliberate, ritualistic. Each union was recorded under candlelight, witnessed by the same 2 signatures, C. Hallow and S. Harrow. Thomas turned the parchment over. The back bore the faint imprint of a rosary bead, pressed into the paper like a bruise. Outside the storm deepened. Rain whispered against stained glass, wind circling the old church as if searching for a way in. He rose to check the latch of the heavy wooden door. It held firm, but the sound did not stop. It seemed to breathe through the keyhole, soft as a sigh. Returning to the table, he pulled another record from the shelf. The ledger was brittle with age, its spine cracked like old bone. Inside, the same looping hand recorded a funeral. Lord William Harrow, departed 1839. Interred beneath Harrow grounds. Survived by wife Elsbeth and sons Edward, Julian, and Simon. Thomas read the final line twice. The house holds what the grave cannot. It was not a priest's note. It was a warning. The hour had grown late. Wax had nearly consumed the candle, its light fluttering low. Thomas gathered the ledgers into a neat stack, intending to return at dawn. Yet as he reached for his coat, a sound rose from the nave beyond the archive room. Something faint, deliberate. Footsteps. Slow and unhurried. He froze. No one else had the keys to the parish except the caretaker who lived miles away. The air grew colder. The flame leaned toward the door as if drawn by breath. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed against the walls. Then faintly a whisper. It came from the far pews, too low to discern, too human to ignore. Thomas set down the candle and stepped forward, the echo of his boots swallowed by the stone floor. The whisper ceased. He reached the threshold of the nave. Moonlight spilled through the rose window, fractured into pale shards across the floor. The benches stood empty. The pulpit was bare. Only the wind moved, until his gaze fell upon the front altar. There, upon the marble slab, lay a small wreath of white lilies, fresh, impossible in the dead of winter. He took a step closer. The lilies were bound with a strip of black ribbon. Faded letters embroidered across it read, "In remembrance of the living." His hand trembled as he traced the stitching. Beneath the wreath lay a folded paper. He hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting matched the old records, elegant, looping, unmistakably feminine. For those who seek the truth, beware what marriage means in this house. The candle behind him guttered out. Darkness folded over the church like a closing fist. He stood motionless, listening to the storm rattle the high windows. Then, softly, a door creaked somewhere deep in the building, one that should not have been opened in decades. Thomas turned toward the sound, heart thundering in his chest. But before he could move, a cold gust extinguished every trace of warmth. When he relit his match, the wreath was gone. Only the damp outline remained where it had rested, shaped like a ghostly crown. He gathered his notes, his breath shallow. As he left the archive, he glanced once more at the ledger on the table. The ink had darkened. The last line, once faint, now read clearly beneath the wavering light. To preserve the house, the bride must be eternal. Outside, Edivane slept beneath its fog. The sea roared far below, and the bells of St. Callum's struck midnight. And though the storm passed before dawn, those who entered the church next morning found the altar lilies scattered across the floor, each petal blackened as if touched by flame. There were no lights upon the cliffs of Edivane after 1839. The Harrow estate, once a beacon of white limestone and wealth, became a monument of shadow and silence. Locals said the air around it had a weight, an invisible heaviness that slowed the tide, that hushed the crickets at night. Even the servants who once carried laughter through its corridors now carried only rumors. Before the fire, before the records were sealed, the Harrow name had meant dominion. Lord William Harrow had ruled the coastal lands with the grace of a scholar and the cruelty of a collector. He prized purity, not of heart but of blood. To him, the future of the South depended on lineage unbroken by common birth. When he died, his vision did not die with him, it was buried alive within his wife. Lady Elsbeth Harrow had been beautiful once, or so said the portraits that still hung above the manor's grand staircase. Her youth was a mirror of candlelight, pale, still, and unflinching. But after her husband's death, something in her changed. Her eyes no longer met anyone's directly. Her speech grew slower, colder. She stopped attending the parish. She dismissed the housekeepers and kept only 3 maids, silent and obedient. The grand parlor curtains were never opened again. Her sons grew in that darkness. Edward, the eldest, had inherited his father's severity. His jawline was sharp as command, his voice low as the sea. He had been barely 15 when he began walking the grounds alone at night, muttering to himself, tracing patterns in the dirt. Julian, the second, was gentler but stranger. He painted faces over and over again, never signing his canvases. Sometimes he painted his mother's face with 3 sets of eyes, or with her hands folded over her own reflection. Simon, the youngest, barely remembered his father. He was the only one who still prayed, though even his prayers carried confusion. They lived as though the outside world had ended. The manor's clock never struck the correct hour, it had stopped the day Lord Harrow was lowered into the ground. In that timeless house, days melted into one another. Lady Elsbeth forbade mirrors. The living must not imitate the dead, she once told Edward when he caught his reflection in a window pane. She claimed reflections could borrow souls. The servants covered every looking-glass with black cloths and kept them that way, even as mildew crept beneath the silk. At dinner, they sat at the long oak table beneath the oil portraits of their ancestors. Elsbeth presided at the head, her sons arrayed like disciples. They spoke little and always of the same things: inheritance, devotion, legacy. The firelight never reached the far end of the room, where the portraits seemed to shift when no one watched. Rumor spread through Edivane's lower quarter that the Harrows no longer sent their children to school because they had learned all they needed within their own walls. Others whispered that the mother had taken a vow too sacred to name. Once, a postman claimed to have seen Elsbeth walking barefoot along the cliff edge at dawn, her white dress dragging through the wet grass, her lips moving in prayer. But when he blinked, she was gone. In 1841, a new sound joined the wind, a faint organ melody drifting from the manor's chapel long after midnight. The priest of St. Callum's, Father Alaric, noted it in his diary but did not intervene. He wrote, "If they have found peace, let it remain theirs." Some prayers are not meant to be overheard. But not all within Harrow Manor were at peace. Simon began to keep a small notebook, a diary bound in cracked leather. His handwriting trembled with youth, yet his words were old. Mother says Father's will was unfinished. She says it is my duty to complete it. But I do not know what he asked for, only what she demands. She prays in the chapel when the moon is full. Edward guards the door. Julian watches from the balcony and does not blink. I think they hear someone else's voice when she speaks. By the autumn of that year, all 3 sons had come of age. On the evening of Simon's 18th birthday, Lady Elsbeth gathered them in the parlor. The rain lashed against the glass, thunder rolled low and endless over the sea. She stood before the covered mirror and spoke with a stillness that silenced even the storm. "Your father built this house upon purity," she said. "He died before his work was done. I will not let what he began be lost to strangers. The world beyond this gate corrupts all that it touches. We will remain unbroken." Edward bowed his head. Julian's eyes gleamed with something like reverence. Simon shivered. Then she lifted the black cloth from the mirror. The glass was dark, rippling like deep water. And in it they saw not their reflections, but only her, multiplied 4 times, her face unaging, her hands outstretched as if in benediction. The mirrors shattered with a whisper, scattering across the rug like frozen breath. The next morning the maids were gone. Their rooms stood open, beds unslept in, uniforms folded neatly at the footboards. The carriage horses had vanished from the stable. The Harrows were alone. By winter, smoke no longer rose from the manor's chimneys. Those who passed the gates claimed they heard a woman singing through the fog, a slow, wordless hymn that made dogs whimper and crows circle. The parish council voted to send a priest to bless the estate, but none volunteered. Only one man agreed to go, not for faith but for curiosity. Father Callum, newly appointed and known for his unshakable resolve. He would arrive in the spring of 1842. And by summer's end, his name would join the others buried in the parish's forbidden records. Morning crept into the manor like a reluctant guest. The light that filtered through the long, dust-covered windows was pale and uncertain, cutting through the remnants of the night like a blade. Father Callum had not slept. His mind replayed Lady Harrow's words in a feverish loop. The blood must remain pure, unbroken. He rose from the narrow bed, still dressed in his priest's cassock, and stepped into the corridor. The air smelled of mildew and salt. The floorboards moaned under his weight as if the house itself resented his intrusion. Down the hall, a door stood slightly ajar. Inside, faint voices murmured. He moved closer, pausing beside the doorway. Inside, the 3 sons were gathered around a long wooden table strewn with old books, sketches, and rusted instruments. The eldest, Simon, read from a small leather-bound volume while the others listened. And the union was sanctified beneath the waning moon. Simon's voice was low but clear, reverent almost. The line continued, and the curse was kept from the sea. The youngest brother, Matthew, Callum recalled, leaned forward. "Mother says the sea still remembers," he whispered. "That's why the waves sound like crying." Simon shut the book. "The sea remembers everything. That's why she keeps us close." Callum's pulse quickened. There was a soft scrape as he shifted his foot, and Simon's head turned sharply toward the door. Their eyes met. "You shouldn't be listening, Father," Simon said, his tone almost kind. "I only wish to understand," Callum replied carefully, stepping into the room. "What curse is this you speak of?" The middle brother, Elias, gave a strange, humorless smile. "You wouldn't believe us if we told you." "Try me," said the priest. Simon studied him for a moment, then gestured to a chair. "Sit then. You came here for truth, perhaps you'll hear it." Callum sat, though unease gripped his gut. The table between them was covered in sketches, anatomical drawings, family crests, and symbols he recognized faintly from ancient religious texts. There were also portraits, of women who looked eerily similar, each separated by generations but sharing the same eyes, the same faint scar along the cheek. "This house," Simon began, "was built on a promise made long before our time. When our ancestors first came to these shores, they made a pact with something older than the church, older than the land itself. In exchange for prosperity, the family vowed to keep the blood untainted. No outsiders. No strangers. Only the pure line." Callum frowned. "That is not faith, it's superstition. Paganism." Elias leaned closer, his tone almost taunting. "And yet your church buried its own sins in the same soil, didn't it? You of all people should know that bloodlines and belief are often one and the same." The priest ignored the barb. "And your mother, Lady Harrow, she believes this still?" Simon's expression softened, almost mournful. "She doesn't just believe it, she lives it. We all do." There was a long silence. The candle between them flickered, its flame bending as if stirred by an unseen breath. Finally Callum said quietly, "You mean to tell me, you are bound to her by more than birth?" Matthew shifted uneasily, glancing toward the window. Simon did not answer immediately. Instead he stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner. From it he retrieved a small glass vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid. "This," he said, holding it up to the light, "is the reason we endure." Callum rose, peering closer. "What is it?" Simon smiled faintly. "Our legacy. A tincture drawn from the blood of the first mother. It keeps the curse asleep." Elias added, "Without it we lose more than our sanity. The sea calls us home." Callum shook his head. "You speak as though possessed." "We are," Simon said simply, "by the past." The priest's faith wavered in that moment. Their conviction was chilling, but what frightened him more was the calm certainty in their voices. They did not seem mad, they seemed devoted. He looked toward the window again. Outside, mist rolled across the cliffs, swallowing the horizon. He thought of the chapel he'd passed upon arrival, half buried by vines, its bell tower broken. Perhaps there were answers there. "I would like to see the graves," he said suddenly. "You mentioned your father rests on the hill." Simon's smile faltered. "He rests, yes. But not peacefully." Elias rose. "If you want to see him, go. But don't say we didn't warn you." The brothers exchanged a glance, then left the room, leaving Callum alone with the candle and the vial. The dark liquid inside pulsed faintly as if alive. He hesitated, then slipped it into his pocket. Outside, the air was damp and heavy with the smell of rain. The hill rose behind the house, dotted with crooked stones and tangled weeds. The chapel loomed at its crest, its doors hanging open like a wound. He climbed slowly, his boots sinking into the soft earth. Ravens circled overhead, their cries sharp and hollow. When he reached the chapel, he stopped. The ground near the steps was disturbed, as though something had been recently unearthed. He knelt and brushed aside the dirt. Beneath it, a stone slab bore the name William Harrow, 1801 to 1829. So the father did exist, he thought. But why did the son speak of him as if he were still present? A sound came from behind him, footsteps crunching on gravel. He turned. Lady Harrow stood at the edge of the path, her veil lifted, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here, father," she said softly. "The dead rest uneasily when strangers pry." Callum rose. "What have you done to them?" "Your sons, they believe they are cursed. They believe they are bound to you in ways that defy God." Her eyes glinted. "Defy God? No, father. I merely continued what he began. Creation is not sin, it is survival. When men abandoned us, when the sea claimed our fathers and brothers, I did what I must to preserve the line." "That is monstrous," Callum whispered. "Monstrous?" she repeated. "Then perhaps monsters are what keep the world alive." The wind rose, tearing at her veil. Her hair spilled out, streaked with silver and salt. "Tell me, father," she said, stepping closer, "if the church demanded that you bury your blood, would you not bleed to keep it sacred?" He could not answer. Her voice softened, almost sorrowful. "You think I am evil. But you have not seen what lies beneath this house." "What lies beneath?" She smiled faintly. "Our beginning." Before he could speak again, she turned and walked away, her figure dissolving into the fog. Father Callum stood alone among the graves, the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. In his pocket, the vial pulsed once, warm, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. And from the earth beneath the chapel, he thought he heard something move. Something alive. The ground seemed to breathe. He stumbled back, his faith trembling, his mind a storm of disbelief. Whatever the Harrows had buried, it was not only their dead. It was their secret, and now it was waking. The night returned to Harrow House with a violence that felt alive. Clouds gathered low and heavy above the moors, and the wind pressed itself against the windows like a desperate spirit seeking entry. Father Callum did not sleep. He sat in the narrow chamber he'd been given, the small vial still warm in his hand. Every time he tried to put it away, he could feel it beating faintly, pulsing like a living vein. He opened his journal and tried to write. "I have seen blasphemy cloaked as blood," he scrawled, "and faith rewritten in flesh." But the ink trembled on the page, the words uncertain, as though the very air of this house resisted confession. He stared toward the fireplace, where the embers had nearly died, and for a moment he thought he saw faces flicker within the ashes, pale, open-mouthed, whispering things too low to hear. The clock in the hall struck 3. A sound followed, soft, deliberate, scraping across the floorboards beyond his door. He rose, every sense awake, and opened it. The corridor was long, dimly lit by a single candelabrum left burning at the far end. Shadows leaned against the walls like living silhouettes. The sound came again. This time it was clearer, a dragging noise, something heavy being moved. He followed it. The noise led him to the staircase descending into the lower halls, where the air grew colder, thicker, damp with the scent of the sea. The candlelight seemed to fade the farther he went, swallowed by the dark. When he reached the bottom, he realized he was not alone. A door stood open, one he had not noticed before. From within came the sound of quiet chanting. Callum crept closer. The room beyond was lit by lanterns hung in a perfect circle around a great slab of stone. Upon it were carved symbols that made his stomach twist, serpents biting their own tails, interlocking rings of thorns, and a shape he could not name but that filled him with wordless dread. Lady Harrow stood at the center, her sons around her. Each held a candle and a small silver knife. Their faces were solemn, almost peaceful. Simon spoke first. "The blood returns to the root to the earth. the earth to the sea. Elias followed. The vow must be renewed. The line must hold. Then the youngest, Matthew, his voice trembling but steady, whispered, "Mother, shall we begin?" Callum's heart hammered. The air smelled of iron and salt. Lady Harrow turned as if she had known he was there all along. "Come in, father," she said softly. "If you are to bear witness, then do so fully." He stepped inside, though every instinct screamed to flee. "What is this blasphemy?" he demanded. "You cannot." But his words faltered when he saw what lay upon the stone. A figure, female, motionless. Her skin was pale as porcelain, her face covered with a lace veil. Her hands were folded neatly across her chest, and around her wrists were bands of black ribbon. "She was the first," Lady Harrow said, touching the woman's forehead with reverence. "The mother of us all. Her blood runs in every vein of this house. This is desecration." Callum cried. "Desecration?" she echoed, her eyes blazing in the candlelight. "No, father. This is remembrance. The church builds its cathedrals from bones. We only keep ours closer." Before he could speak again, Simon lifted the silver knife and drew it gently across his palm. The blood fell in small, perfect drops onto the slab. Elias followed, then Matthew, their red joining his. Lady Harrow extended her hand to Callum. "All things return to their beginning," she said. "You too are part of this night now." He stepped back, trembling. "I will burn this house to the ground before I let this continue." The candle flames shivered, bending toward him as though drawn by his words. The air thickened, humming with low vibrations, a sound too deep to be merely wind. Lady Harrow lowered her gaze. "You cannot burn what has already been reborn 100 times." Then she began to sing, a low rhythmic chant that rose and fell like waves against the cliffs. The brothers joined her, their voices weaving into one dark harmony. The floor trembled beneath Callum's feet. He stumbled back toward the door, but it slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. From the stone slab came a faint sound. A sigh. Then another. The woman beneath the veil began to move. Her chest lifted, slow, deliberate. Her fingers twitched against the ribbons. Callum's breath caught in his throat as the veil slid aside, revealing eyes clouded like sea glass, unfocused yet aware. "Do you see now?" Lady Harrow whispered. "The curse is not death. It is return." The figure turned her head toward Callum. Her lips parted and a single word escaped, a name though he could not understand it. The lanterns flickered wildly, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. The brothers fell to their knees, murmuring prayers that were not prayers at all. Callum grabbed the nearest candle and hurled it at the circle. Wax and flames splattered across the floor, catching the edge of a cloth. Fire leapt up instantly, bright and furious. Lady Harrow did not move. She only watched as the fire spread. "You cannot stop it," she said calmly. "You only wake it faster." The house groaned. Somewhere above, glass shattered. The flames rose higher, devouring the symbols, crawling up the stone walls like living things. Callum seized the door handle. It burned his hand, but he forced it open and stumbled out into the corridor, coughing, the vial still clutched in his pocket. Behind him, the chant became a roar. He ran up the stairs, through the dark hall, past portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow him. The fire was spreading fast, chasing him from room to room. He could hear the voices, Lady Harrow's and her son's, echoing from below, still chanting, still calm. When he burst through the front doors into the rain, he turned back once. The house was alive with light, each window flickering like the eyes of a beast awakening. The air filled with a low, deep rumble that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. Then, above it all, he heard the sea. It was closer than before. Louder. As though the cliffs themselves were crumbling. Callum fell to his knees in the mud, the rain washing ash from his face. He clutched the vial tight, feeling it pulse faster, stronger, in rhythm with the sound of the surf. And then he understood. The house was not dying. It was breathing. The curse had not ended, it had only shifted its form. The bloodline was not bound to a name or a face, it was bound to the soil, to the sea, to the land that had swallowed its sins whole. And as the flames rose behind him, Father Callum heard the faintest sound drifting through the rain, a woman's voice, soft and endless, calling his name from the water below. When dawn came, it did not bring light, only a colorless haze that smothered the moors in silence. Harrow House stood blackened against the horizon, its once proud frame reduced to smoke and cinder. Yet even as the last embers cooled, Father Callum knew it was not over. The air was wrong. Too still. Too alive. He had taken shelter in the chapel at the base of the hill, though the word shelter was generous. Its roof sagged, its crucifix half swallowed by ivy, and the smell of rot lingered beneath the altar. He sat there, drenched and trembling, the vial clutched in his hand. It was no longer pulsing, just faintly warm like the last breath of something dying. But when he tried to throw it away, his arm froze mid-motion. The thought came unbidden, gentle yet absolute. If you destroy it, you destroy them all. He lowered it slowly. A sound came from outside, hooves on wet soil. A carriage? Impossible, he thought. No road led here anymore. Yet as he peered through the broken window, he saw it. A black carriage, draped in tattered cloth, pulled by two skeletal horses. Its driver wore no hat, no face, only a shadow beneath a wide-brimmed hood. The carriage stopped before the chapel doors. Callum's breath caught as the door creaked open and a woman stepped out, her veil soaked in rain, her dress scorched along the hem. "Lady Harrow," he whispered. She was untouched by smoke or flame, her posture perfect, her eyes sharp and alive. The fire had not claimed her, it had remade her. "You tried to bury us again," she said softly, stepping closer. "But the soil remembers its own." Callum stumbled backward. "You should not exist. None of this should." She smiled faintly. "And yet here we are." Behind her the mist stirred. 3 figures emerged, her sons. Their skin was ashen, their eyes pale and distant, but they moved with quiet purpose. They stood behind her in perfect silence, like obedient sentinels awaiting command. "What do you want from me?" Callum demanded. Lady Harrow tilted her head. "You took something that belongs to us." His hand went instinctively to the pocket where the vial rested. "This? It's cursed. It's poison." Her expression softened almost to pity. "It's life. Ours. Yours if you wish it." "I will not drink your sin," he spat. For the first time her smile faltered. "Sin," she repeated. "Is that what you think this is? Tell me, Father, when your church burned women for knowledge and called it salvation, was that not sin? When your kind took sons from their mothers in the name of purity, was that not the same blood you now condemn?" Her voice grew colder. "The world is built on incest and inheritance. The difference is only who dares to name it." The rain intensified, hammering the chapel roof. Callum stepped back toward the altar. "Whatever your justifications, you defy God himself." Lady Harrow's gaze flickered upward, toward the broken cross above him. "God?" she murmured. "He's been here longer than you think." He just stopped answering. Then the ground trembled. From the cliffs beyond, the sound of rushing water filled the air, louder than the storm, deeper than the wind. Callum turned toward the doorway just as a wave of sea mist poured through it, carrying the stench of salt and decay. Within the mist, he saw them, figures half-formed, faces blurred, their eyes hollow. "The drowned ones," Lady Harrow said calmly. "Our fathers, our sons." The sea gave them back as promised. Callum's legs threatened to give way. The shapes moved closer, dragging wet footsteps across the chapel floor, their voices rising in a chorus of low, guttural prayer. He clutched the vial tighter. "If this is your doing, if this is the blood that binds them, I can end it." "You can try," she whispered. He lifted it above his head and threw it against the altar. The glass shattered with a sound sharper than thunder. For a moment there was silence. Then the air screamed. A wind burst outward, knocking him to his knees. The mist imploded, folding in on itself as if sucked into an unseen mouth. The drowned figures howled, their forms unraveling into ribbons of water and shadow. Lady Harrow staggered but did not fall. Her sons clutched their chests, faces contorted in silent agony. The vial's contents had spilled across the stone floor, dark as ink. It spread quickly, seeping into the cracks between the flagstones, vanishing downward. When the last drop disappeared, the house on the hill gave a low, distant groan. Lady Harrow straightened slowly. Her face was pale, trembling, her eyes wet with something that was not grief. "You've undone the seal," she whispered. "Not destroyed it." What have I done?" Callum stammered. Her lips curved into a grim smile. "You've woken the sea itself." Outside, a sound rose, not thunder this time but something deeper rolling beneath the earth. The ground shuddered. From the direction of the cliffs came a terrible crack, followed by the roar of collapsing stone. Callum ran to the door. The cliffs were crumbling into the ocean, swallowed whole. The water surged upward, devouring the beach, racing toward the manor ruins like a beast reclaiming its prey. He turned back but the chapel was empty. Lady Harrow and her sons were gone. Only the faint smell of burning salt remained. The floor beneath him began to split, small fissures crawling like veins. He backed away toward the altar, his faith unraveling with each breath. The water was coming, he could hear it rushing closer, pounding the earth in waves. And then, amid the chaos, a voice whispered behind him. "Father Callum." He spun around. Lady Harrow stood once more before the altar, her veil gone, her hair loose and wet, her skin glowing faintly with the reflection of the rising water. "The sea does not forget," she said. "It remembers every promise made upon its shore. Even yours." He tried to speak, but the ground gave way. The floor split open and cold seawater erupted upward, drenching him in brine and earth. The chapel was collapsing. Lady Harrow reached out her hand, not to harm but to offer. "For the line to end," she whispered, "you must take it within yourself." He stared at her hand, at her eyes that no longer belonged to any living woman. Then he reached forward and grasped her wrist. The water surged around them, rising to their waists, their chests, their throats. In the roaring dark, Callum felt the sea fill his lungs. But within that flood was warmth, terrible, living warmth, and a heartbeat that was not his own. The last thing he saw before the world went black was Lady Harrow's face dissolving into salt and light. And then the sea claimed them both. Beneath the tide. When the sea swallowed Harrow Manor, the storm did not end. The waves raged for 3 days and 3 nights, as if the Atlantic itself resisted what it had been forced to keep. But on the 4th night, the surface went still, flat as glass, silent as a coffin lid. Those who lived along the cliffs said the air changed, that the salt began to taste like iron, and that gulls no longer circled the water. None dared look down into the depths. None but one. Father Callum's body never rose to the surface. At least, not in the way flesh is expected to rise. He opened his eyes in the dark. The sea was a cathedral around him, columns of kelp reaching toward a dim green ceiling, schools of fish drifting like fragments of forgotten prayers. His cassock floated about him in shreds, his rosary tangled around his wrist. He felt no need for breath, no beat within his chest. Only stillness. Only the low hum of voices that did not belong to the living. He tried to speak, but the sound that escaped was not his own. It was her. "Peace must be kept," Lady Harrow's voice whispered through the current, soft and endless. He turned, and there she was, moving through the water as though born of it. Her veil drifted behind her like black smoke, her skin pale as moonlight, her eyes luminous. Around her floated 3 figures, their forms ghostly but unmistakable: Edward, Julian, Simon. They did not swim, they hovered, chained to her by silver cords that pulsed faintly like veins of light. Callum tried to cross himself, but his hand froze halfway. The motion felt hollow now, an echo of something that belonged to another world. "You should have stayed above," she said, her words rippling through the water. "The sea keeps secrets better than men. What have you done?" His voice was a whisper, distorted, more thought than sound. "What are you?" Lady Harrow's smile was slow, ancient. "A mother," she said simply. "A keeper of bloodlines. The church breeds faith, I breed permanence. The sea is our witness now." The light shifted. Behind her, the silhouettes of the sons began to move, their eyes opening one by one. Edward's gaze burned with loyalty, Julian's flickered like candlelight on wet stone, Simon's glimmered faintly, uncertain still. Their mouths moved together, chanting words that Callum recognized too late: Ave Mater, Ave Aeternam, a perversion of prayer transformed into worship. The ocean floor trembled beneath them. The ruins of Harrow Manor appeared in the gloom, its black stones descending through layers of sand and coral, its grand staircase leading nowhere. Curtains of seaweed framed broken windows. And within those windows, faces stirred. Not fish, not memory, faces. Dozens, hundreds, preserved by the salt, pale and staring. The daughters, the wives, the brides of the sons who never escaped the family's reach. "You see," Lady Harrow whispered, "nothing dies. Flesh only changes its covenant." Callum tried to swim upward, but his body refused to move. His limbs felt anchored, bound to something he could not see. The rosary around his wrist had tightened, its beads turning from wood to bone, the cross bending like soft metal. A whisper crawled into his mind: "One cannot bless what one has become." He screamed silently, and the sound shook the silt around him. From the darkness, hands rose, hundreds of them, spectral, reaching toward him. They were the hands of the forgotten. Slaves buried in unmarked graves, women drowned in silence, children born only to die beneath family names. All drawn to the mother who claimed them. Lady Harrow extended her hand. "Do not fear them, Father. They belong to me. As do you." "I belong to God," he gasped, though his words dissolved into bubbles. Her eyes flared, brighter than the drowned sun. Then where is he? The question echoed endlessly. The sea answered only with pressure, crushing, absolute. His faith splintered like glass. He remembered the sermons he'd given, the sins he'd condemned, and realized how small they were compared to this communion of the damned. The true sacrament of legacy. Slowly Lady Harrow approached. Her hand brushed his chest and warmth surged through the water, not heat but the memory of it. His heart, still motionless, began to throb once. Then again. It did not beat for God but for her. A thread of light extended from his chest to hers, binding him to the chain that already linked the suns. You see, she whispered. Even priests remember their mothers. He wanted to fight, to pray, to rise, but the tide inside him had turned. The light grew brighter until the water itself seemed to burn. The sea roared with voices, the chorus of centuries of bloodlines colliding. Harrow Manor's ruins began to pulse like a living heart, each window glowing faintly from within. And then just as quickly the light vanished. The sea fell silent once more. On the surface days later, fishermen spoke of strange lights beneath the waves, like candles moving through the deep. Nets returned torn, ropes soaked in red silt. Those who anchored near Harrow Cliff claimed to hear a woman's lullaby through the fog. A song without words, soft as morning, steady as the tide. At night, when the moon hung low, the waves seemed to breathe. Some said the shape of a house appeared just below the surface, its roof glimmering faintly. And sometimes, only sometimes, they swore they saw figures moving through its halls. Father Callum was never found. But the sea began to change. The fish born near the cliff grew pale, their eyes wide and human-like. A child born in the nearby village had a faint mark over his heart, the shape of a rosary cross. And each year on the storm's anniversary the tide rose higher as though seeking something, or someone, it had yet to return. Beneath that vast silence Lady Harrow waited. Her sons waited. And far below, Father Callum knelt among them, his eyes open, his lips moving soundlessly in prayer, or in praise. The sea had taken their sins, yes, but it had also kept their names. Perfect. Here's the final ending paragraph to close the 6,000-word story. History tried to hide this. 3 sons who married their own mother. Years passed, then centuries, and the legend of Harrow Manor sank deeper than the stones that once held its secrets. Yet some nights along the Carolina coast, when fog creeps across the waves and the moon turns the water white, sailors still whisper of the hymn that drifts through the mist, a woman's voice, soft and endless, calling her children home. They say the sea near Harrow Cliff never stays calm for long, that every storm begins with a single cry that sounds like a mother's grief, low, trembling, and almost human. The villagers who still live inland swear that if you listen too long, you'll hear 3 answering voices beneath the tide, rising in harmony, bound forever in their mother's song. And when dawn breaks, the waters fall silent again, as if the sea itself remembers and mourns what should have never been. If this tale found you tonight, let it rest with a like, and wake again with a subscribe.